Good morning and welcome to another Exploring Cognitive Biases video. Today I am exploring the bias blind spot. But you don't need to know about this. You don't need to watch this video, right? Because biases don't impact on you. They don't affect you. You know better, right? Yeah. Actually, that's exactly what blind spot bias is all about. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. But for those who are just tuning in, hi, and thanks for tuning in. For those who are watching on the replay, great to have you here. Let me know where and when you're watching from, just because I'm nosy. I am Duncan Price from Mind Affinity, and I love the mind and how it works. And I love just how brilliantly incapable we are of fully understanding it. So I like talking about it and exploring it, and I want to invite you on this journey with me to explore these different biases, how they work, and the way that we think and make our decisions. And this is probably one of the most futile videos on cognitive biases that I'm going to do. And you may have heard me mention, I can see lots of people tuning in now, and you may have heard me mention, if you've watched any of my previous videos, I quite often say one of the best things that you can do to counteract these biases is to be aware of them. However, that in itself isn't necessarily going to change anything. See, we all have a tendency to believe that we are less prone to and less impacted by these different biases than we really are. And that's okay, right? That's completely normal. But it does make understanding these biases and the impact they have on us a little bit harder sometimes. So the bias blind spot is the cognitive bias of recognizing the impact of biases on the judgment of others while failing to see how it impacts on our own judgment, right? So it's really relatively easy for us to look at someone else and go, yes, sorry, I lost the comments for a minute. Yeah, it's really easy, or relatively easy, for us to look at someone else and see that they have a bias informing their decisions and their choices, but far harder to see that when we reflect inwardly on ourselves. And there's no real surprise to this. And part of this is videos that I've spoken about before help cover this to some extent. So, for example, I've spoken about introspection illusion. I've spoken about illusory superiority before, and introspection illusion. So we like to believe that good things about ourselves, and we tend not to notice or pay much attention to or want to acknowledge bad things about ourselves. We want to believe that we are good people ultimately. And so because cognitive bias is seen as a bad thing, because having a negative response, not even necessarily negative, but a response to something that's outside of our control feels like something we wouldn't want to do, we tend to be really good at ignoring it and not acknowledging that it's real. Big part of the challenge is that even when it's pointed out to us, it's still difficult for us to really recognize and acknowledge it. Or we can recognize and acknowledge it, but not necessarily change how we feel. And at risk of going on a tangent, actually, I think there's a kind of beauty to that as well, right? We sometimes live in this idea that we have full control over our world and we have complete autonomy over everything. But that just isn't necessarily true. It feels very true and very real, but you don't decide what your next thought is going to be. You can't choose what's going to happen in the next moment. You can influence it. You can put things in place to lead it down a certain route. But we are ultimately an amalgamation of all of our experiences and everything that we've been through. So we've been shaped along the way by things completely outside of our control. Why is it so difficult to acknowledge that sometimes the way that we respond and react to something, or the way that we initially react to something, is also outside of our control? What we do with that, how we respond to it, and from there on, I believe that we have a lot of say over, a lot of influence over. But the initial response, once it's already happened, we can't go back and change. We can learn from it and be intentional about how we influence ourselves to respond in the future. But these biases, we learn them along the way, and it's not until we become aware of them that we can do something about them. And realistically, changing them is about changing our underlying beliefs. That's what makes the difference to those biases. Not necessarily correcting for the bias itself, but reflecting, noticing the part that they've played by understanding them more. In other words, watch all of my videos so you understand them better. And then you can use that to help you to find, identify, recognize, and acknowledge, and ultimately change the limiting beliefs that you may not realize that you're holding on to. So a simple example of this would be, I think it was a bias video that I was doing previously. It may have been Mind Matters, one of my chats with Paul Newton. Check out my YouTube channel for more of those, where we were talking about imagining a situation. You walk onto a bus and there's the driver and there's a couple with a child and and the vast majority of people imagining that probably saw a male bus driver and almost definitely saw a male and female couple with a child. Doesn't have to be that way. Is it wrong that we think that way? No, we didn't decide to picture it that way. That's just what most of us have come to expect from that kind of description, and that is in itself a bias. So you might say you're not biased, but clearly you are. And if you didn't see that, then that doesn't mean you're not biased. If you saw a female bus driver, that's an expectation that you had. That's something that you created in your own mind. If you saw a homosexual couple with a child, that's an expectation that you created in your own mind. Either way, there's a bias at play. So the idea of trying to be immune from bias sounds like this glorious thing that we want to aspire to, but it's rubbish. Because A, you'll never get there, and B, having a bias in itself is not a problem. Having a gut feeling that's informed by a whole load of different subconscious processes that you've gone through before you've even become aware. I mean, that's the nature of subconscious processes, is they are subconscious. You're not aware of them. So your brain automatically does all of these things, these calculations, goes, here's what you're expecting, here's the answer. That's okay. I say trust in it. Go with it. Use it to your advantage. Like, making decisions can be really freaking hard. Why not use the ability you've naturally got to make those decisions more easily? You don't know how that's going to end up. And choice paralysis, not making a decision, that's guaranteed to hold you back. Making a choice, even a wrong one, will move you forward in some way or another. Who knows what direction? Who knows where you'll end up? Who knows what else could come from it? It might be a horrendous failure. Fantastic. Think how much you'll learn along the way. It could lead to amazing things, either directly or indirectly. So I guess my challenge for you today is, when you make choices throughout your day, simple choices, little things, and we make way more decisions and choices in a day than you might think, I encourage you to, a few times through the day today, pause, stop, and reflect. Think about the choices and decisions that you've made in the last hour or two. And think, okay, what actually led me to that choice? What influences acted upon me? What beliefs do I have that made me act or react in that particular fashion? Don't beat yourself up for them. Just acknowledge them, notice them. Look out for your biases as much as you are able to see other people's. just purely to notice it more, become more aware. Accept them. Understand that that's just part of being human. So Christina says, interesting thought. Roll with the instinct and see where your journey takes you. Like, that's, yes, exactly. That's life, right? Whatever you do, no matter how fastidious you are, no matter how careful you are, things aren't going to go as you plan, right? It doesn't matter how, in fact, the more clearly and defined your plan is, the more clearly defined your plan is, the less likely it is that things are going to go that way, right? It's good to have a plan. It's good to have an idea. And it's good to lay that out, sure. But don't become so tied in with that that you can't accept the flexibility. Move forward. Move. Whatever way you're moving, you're going to end up somewhere, right? And yeah, I really do believe that your subconscious mind processes so much more information than we are capable of processing consciously in the same space of time. This is why you get some people who study and train and become body language experts, and that's brilliant. But what if you just listen to your gut, which is already a body language expert, right? So I'm sure you've had it too, where before you've even spoken to someone, you've seen them and just gone, not sure about you. Don't know what it is. Maybe it's something about their facial expression, something about the way they hold themselves. It could be that it just reminds you of someone else you didn't like in the past. That's kind of okay too. And then as you get to meet them and know them, you realize that, yeah, you're not the same kind of people. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean there's any problem with that. It just means that you're not really going to get that connection. That's okay. We don't have to love everyone. Failing forward, love it. Failing forward is better than not moving at all. Couldn't agree more. And the thing is, like, so I used to say there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. Sounds good, doesn't it? I don't believe that anymore. I don't disbelieve it. It's just that I don't use that phraseology, because now I freaking love failure. Yes, failure is feedback, absolutely. But failure is not a bad thing. We don't need to pretend it's something else. We don't need to say, oh, no, failure doesn't exist. It's just feedback. No, it's failure. But failure is a beautiful thing. Call a spade a spade. Because when you call a spade, you can recognize that actually, yeah, that spade might be a really rubbish rake. But when you know that it's a spade, you can recognize what you can use that spade for. And it becomes much more beneficial and useful for you. Sure, a spade is a bad thing if what you really want is a rake. But if you don't have that rake and you've ended up with a spade, okay, well, how can I use this? What can I do instead? Where can I move? There's so much in life that's outside of our control, including a lot of our own thoughts, right? So rather than try and take control of everything, wouldn't it be better to allow the stuff to happen and find a way to go with it and to use it to your advantage and to use it for something positive, enjoyable, beneficial that helps you or others around you? That's my thoughts on it anyway. So anyway, that went a little bit philosophical and a bit off tangent. But yes, bias blind spot is quite simply finding it harder to acknowledge and recognize your own biases that you would more readily recognize in other people. That's it. That's all it is. How to fix it? Well, you can't. And the moment that you think that you are not biased is the moment that you're more biased than anything else. So yeah, just be prepared to accept and expect that you are biased. And by recognizing and acknowledging that, it is easier, a lot easier, to spot the biases that you do have, some of them at least, and begin therefore to choose different decisions going forward, or stick with the decisions but recognize where they're coming from. And yes, We do learn from failure quite often, very important lessons. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you've had an awesome day. Apologies for my amazing hair. That's what happens when you still haven't got around to booking a haircut and a puppy wakes you up at 4 a.m. so you've not had a chance to do anything with it either, because you've been running after a brand new puppy. But he's so cute. So if you want to see pictures, head to my Facebook page. Anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. Have an awesome week, and I will see you again same time next week with a new cognitive